President Trump said in the White House yesterday before boarding a helicopter that the peace process was nearing its completion in Palestine, that the issue between the Gaza and the Israeli war was nearing its end state, and peace would break out. As he said a few days earlier, he said it's going to be eternal peace breaking out throughout the entire Middle East. Much is hinging on this, but everything depends upon the implementation. And when one takes a look at the fundamentals that are involved with what President Trump is saying, more than even just that one statement there, but what he's released on Truth Social, when you see what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying and what you see what the Palestinian groups and especially Hamas, what they are doing and what's happening on the ground, especially with the Israeli Defense Forces, one would be excused for not being all that optimistic that the war is actually about to end, though it could. And at least there's a shot, a pretty decent shot, I would say, that the fighting at least will stop in the near term. And for that, we are very grateful. That's one of the things that we've been harping on really from the beginning of this, is that let's first get the bloodshed stopped, and then let's get into some negotiations, because the Palestinian people are literally hapless victims that are just being killed in large numbers because this war is continuing to go on. As hard as the negotiated settlement is going to be to get to an actual end to the conflict, much, much better for the population if that happens in the absence of any kind of the conflict. Now, one can certainly argue, as I have in the Russia-Ukraine war, that would be facilitated a lot easier if the Hamas side would capitulate. And right now, the terms being offered here in this peace plan that both the United States and Israel crafted basically toward the end of last week, we got to be honest, and that's basically an instrument of surrender. And that's what the Hamas side is dealing with right now. They have really striven, their tactical and military objectives have been not to lose, not to be destroyed, and just to continue to exist and hope that pressure from outside can help bring some kind of positive results in the inside. That there is some progress in that, and from their perspective, that has happened. There's certainly been more pressure from the outside, though, as we'll see here in a minute, it's not that strong. And I think that probably Hamas is coming to the conclusion that it's not going to be enough to get them any kind of outcome that will leave them in power. And I think that's probably an accurate reading of things. So if Hamas has any concern at all for the people of Palestine, the best thing that they can do and the best way to end this is literally capitulate. Now, they're part of this 21 or 20-point peace plan that was offered by the United States, what was published anyway, did include some amnesty and the ability with some of the Arab regimes or whatever for these guys to have a parachute to get out. Now, I think that that's probably also good, because that gives the Hamas side incentive to actually take that course of action, to take that path, so that they can go somewhere and then finally just lay down their arms and literally leave the entire Gaza Strip. And why I say that that's a good thing for Hamas, one of the very few levers of influence and power that they have right now, is because then that would make it nearly impossible for Israel to do what obviously many in Israel want to do, which is not to have a peace negotiation, not to have a negotiated settlement at all, but to continue on with their war. They want a complete and total military victory. And I think the evidence is pretty strongly concluding, and that they want the expulsion of all the Palestinian people. If they agree to any terms of this at all, if Hamas does the hard thing from their perspective, but the one effective thing that they can do, probably maybe the only lever of influence they have now, and literally agree to withdraw, to disarm, and exit the Gaza Strip, that then makes it nearly impossible for Israel to do what they want to do. So we'll have to wait and see how that's going to work out. If Hamas refuses to do this, if they say the terms are too great, and they almost certainly are going to be, then they're going to be literally helping the Israeli Defense Forces continue to pressure on through. Now, as we're going to see, they will almost certainly do it with the concurrence of the President of the United States. But first of all, let's take a look at what Secretary of State Marco Rubio said yesterday in terms of these. He said a couple of really important things I want to highlight here. First of all, he was describing what the actual peace terms would look like.
I think that we are the closest we have been in a very long time to having no hostages held by Hamas, either living or deceased. The second part of this, and it's going to be a much tougher part of it, is what happens after that? Who's going to run Gaza moving forward? It can't be Hamas. It can't be a terrorist organization. It has to be governed. The Israelis want it to be governed by Palestinian technocrats that aren't building tunnels and aren't launching rockets and aren't conducting terrorist attacks. And the details on that part of the deal are going to be difficult to work through. We've got a general outlines of it, and which Hamas has generally accepted, though not entirely. Some of it is going to have to be discussed, moving back and forth. But ultimately, that is what permanent peace is going to be dependent upon, and that is that Gaza is no longer controlled by a terrorist organization like Hamas. And the demobilization of terrorism in Gaza is the end goal here in terms of ensuring that this never happens again.
Okay, that last part he was talking about there is more important than you may think, because he was describing what he sees as the conditions that will result in a permanent peace. Now, you may recall that I have said many times, and in fact, on television shows and other news, even before the creation of this channel, or right about the same time of it, I continue to say over and over that what happened on 10/7, the terrorist strikes that killed over 1,000 Israeli people, most of them civilians, was a terrible atrocity, and Israel had every right to respond to that with under humanitarian law, under UN law, international law, anything, just common sense. If you're attacked like that, you have a right to response. But I always said that the way you respond is as important as what you do. And whereas you had a right to self-defense here, you don't have a right to impose corporal punishment and then turn the entire population into the targets, which is essentially what's happened. And I said that if Israel keeps going down that path, which they had embarked on right away, I said that they would then end up laying the foundation for their own instability later. They were seeking a military solution to a political problem, bringing peace to the people of Israel, that almost certainly would fail. And now we've seen that graphically play out here. This peace plan right here, so-called, is continuing on with that bad precedence, because everything and the only thing that Secretary of State Rubio was focused on there was what it looks like from the Israeli side for a peace to come. But as I keep saying, and I will say again now, if you don't have the possibility for peace and hope for the Israeli side, and peace and hope in a path for some kind of prosperity and freedom for the Palestinian side, if you don't have it for both, you will have it for neither. Hear me carefully. If this is successful, if they get the outcome that Secretary Rubio described there, they're not going to bring peace to the Israeli people. If you love the Israelis, if you love the government, and then you hate the Palestinians, you don't like them at all, you don't want this outcome, because this won't produce peace. Now, tomorrow, this is the 6th of October today. Tomorrow is the 7th of October, a very important day, and something that will be commemorated by people all over the world, especially in the United States and in Israel. And they'll be talking about all of the heinous destruction that was done by the terrorists on that day, etc. And understandably so, as far as that goes. What you will see almost none of in the United States, and definitely none of in Israel, is what happened in the decades prior to that, which led to the explosion of 10/7. You don't have to condone it. You don't have to agree with it. But if you're a rational thinking human being, you have to say, the Israeli side was literally living in la la land to think that all of the things that happened to that would not at some point produce such an explosion. And that's exactly what happened. Now, tomorrow, I've mentioned many times, I said, history didn't start on 10/7. And tomorrow, we're actually going to go to the true story of the violence against the Palestinians prior to 10/7. And I'm talking the decades prior, all the way back to the year 1946 is where that story will start. And I promise you, you will likely be very, very surprised by some of the things that I will show you there, looking at what had happened prior. And even somebody who loves Israel but is not familiar with the actual history is going to be shocked at some of the things that you see there. And suddenly 10/7 will be put in a little bit different light there. And again, let me just reiterate, even before we get there, I'm not condoning anything that the Palestinians did, because some of it was Hamas, some of it was just some frustrated Palestinian people. They were wrong for doing that. That's violence is never the answer. It's not going to provide a solution to that. And now then you see graphically what did 10-7 do for the Palestinian people. It was catastrophic because it literally opened the door for Israel to try to do what many in Israel have wanted to do for decades, which is the destruction and the expulsion of the people. So it has been a catastrophe beyond recognition what the Palestinian, the Hamas folks did on that day. It's been a just complete disaster, worse than anything that had happened all before that time in terms of how they've suffered. But that brings us back to where we are now, because all of the decades of things that I'll chronicle for you tomorrow that led up to 10-7, what this plan is going to do is start the clock on the next one. Because if you don't have a path for some kind of political hope for freedom and a normal life for the survivors of this disaster that Israel has inflicted upon the Palestinian people, then you will simply be getting the build up to the next one. For a while, it'll be fine because there is such a revulsion of what had happened and all this violence, and people just want to live a day without bombs falling on them. And they haven't had that since the 7th of October. Israel has been attacking every day since. And as you see that Gary shows with this B-roll all the time, literally every time we talk about this, is just the massive and almost total destruction of the entire strip turned into dust. I mean, there's almost nowhere to live. So one's going to have to ask, how is the other half of that equation going to be that the Palestinian people would have an incentive and a motive not to start planning for the next time that they would lash out with violence against the Israeli side? What's described so far is merely a complete disarming of the Hamas side, demilitarization of the situation. I can't remember the term that Netanyahu has used several times, but that they want to retrain the way that the Palestinians think, and somehow he imagines that you can go and teach into the school lovely things about the people who have destroyed their way of life, and tens upon thousands of killed women, children, elderly, men, everybody. Somehow you think that you can just talk them out of feeling what they felt. I mean, that's absurd, of course. And I think that Netanyahu is aware of that. I think that he's actually wants that to be proof that, well, see, they can't be trained. They have to be gotten. We have to get rid of them. I think he's probably laying the foundation for that. But the question is, can you do that? As much as Israel has done over this time, and as much as people have been from other parts of the world have been pushing back on some of this, I don't know. He may think right now, and with some justification, I should point out, that with the backing of the President of the United States and the U.S. military, that he may calculate, Netanyahu, that he can continue going on with that situation to where you're literally trying to either expel, ethnic cleansing, or genocide, destroy everybody. I can no longer say that that won't happen, because it's entirely possible that it could when you look at what has happened over the last 2 years. One of the other things that Rubio said, and it kind of highlights why we're going to have a problem even in the near term, is what the initial map is going to look like. This so-called yellow line you may have heard of. Here it is.
Not just phasing out, they would drop back to what's called the yellow line, which is basically where Israel stood inside of Gaza in the middle of August. And then at that point, the work would begin about building out who's going to govern Gaza moving forward. And that's where the international partners are going to be so critical, not just with personnel, but with money and resources, to create a governance structure led by non-Hamas, non-terrorist Palestinians. But that's going to take some time, not just to set up, but to build and to stabilize. And there's a lot of work that needs to happen. I mean, look, Gaza has been, as you know, a lot of damage been done there. That whole place has to be rebuilt. That's not going to happen in 72 hours or 6 weeks. I mean, that's going to take some time.
So, yeah, that's obviously going to take some time. And this is when he said the yellow line. This is what you see depicted in there. You see that basically all of what was 2.1 million people when this whole war started that lived in that tiny little strip, all squished into that one area, will now then be even further squished into that yellow line there on the inside of it. And it's unclear how that's going to, be tenable, because you're just basically saying y'all are going to exist, all the Palestinian people, inside of that yellow line. And many of the Israelis said, yeah, we're going to have a buffer zone that's at least, I think it's 2 kilometers. I think that's the nearest, although you see it's about 1,500 meters at some points on the far right there. But most of it's more than one point you see 6.5 kilometers, but this big buffer zone. So they say, yeah, we're going to keep safe. So we're just going to shove all these people into there. Who's going to be okay with that, living inside of that? And how long are they going to be left into there? Now, part of the Trump plan that we've chronicled for you last week was that there would be an Arab group providing security guarantees for the Palestinian people on the inside, and that there would then be some sort of acknowledged independent group that would provide security, that would train the police forces, and bring security even within the Gaza Strip and provide policing, etc. But Netanyahu has so far said, we're going to provide all of that. And he said, quote, for the foreseeable future. So it's unclear how even that would square, because if that's your plan, this yellow line, and there's no expiration date on it, there's no even end date. So again, you're taking what was all those millions of people squished into that small area. Now you're going to cut it probably in half or something close to it, and push them further into there. And then, as Rubio did mention in there, discuss these issues, it's going to have to be rebuilt. Who's going to rebuild that? Who's going to pay for that? You may recall earlier this year, Trump released that video that, showed the Gaza Strip on the Riviera, so to speak. And it's going to be this, high-rise buildings and, luxury apartments and all this kind of stuff, and dining on the beach, etc. There were no Palestinians in that deal. Those were all Israeli folks or tourists, and that was kind of the view on it. And they had the big golden Trump statue and all that kind of stuff. That's not something that's going to be part of what's being considered right now. So what is the plan then, and where is all this going, and where is the motivation for the Palestinian people? Forget about the Hamas for the moment, to say, yeah, we're going to be okay with that. And one of the things that was mentioned is, there would be some sort of Palestinian technocrats, I think they called them, and it can't be any terrorists. It certainly can't be any Hamas. Most in the United States and all in Israel have said the Palestinian Authority will also not be allowed to do that. So then the question is going to be who is going to be accepted by the Israeli side as to be a non-terrorist and a technocrat when you have literally wiped out everything in there. I don't know. And that's something I've not heard any answer to, but something that is central to this whole issue. Otherwise, you'll see that the Israeli Defense Forces will simply stay indefinitely. And again, that leads to a place where these people are not going to be passive and just literally just become like zombies and just exist and never do anything. And somehow that's going to bring peace to Israel. It's not going to. Human nature won't even allow that. Nobody could. Imagine yourself, if I can just ask. Imagine yourself taken out of whatever world you live in right now and shoved into a jail with hundreds of thousands of other people and subsistence food at only thing you can eat is the only thing that's given from the outside. There is no economy, there is no jobs, there is no industry, there's literally nothing except existing and food coming in. Now, are you going to be okay with just continuing on with that indefinitely? No plan, no hope, no articulated path to where that can all change. Just stop the fighting, and that's it. I mean, how long will you be okay with that? How long will you be okay with that? I won't be okay with that. And there's no reason to think that the Palestinians are either. So why set up a situation that can't work even for the Israelis, and certainly not for the Palestinian people? That has to be much more thought out and articulated, and a plan, an action plan has to be articulated, or this is just not going to end well. Now, President Trump is not helping out a lot with that right now, because instead of even talking about the plan or even going back to saying, oh, by the way, here's that 20-point plan I had again, you keep hearing about. Let's get to these issues here, like the Palestinian path to statehood. That was one of them. At least it was before. Don't hear Trump talking about that now. In fact, what you do hear Trump talking about is this on Truth Social. He said there have been very positive discussions with Hamas and countries from all over the world, Arab, Muslim, and everyone else this weekend to release the hostages in the war in Gaza, but more importantly, finally have long sought after peace in the Middle East. Cool so far. That's great. Peace in the Middle East. That's for everyone. These talks have been very successful and proceeding rapidly. The technical teams will again meet Monday. That's today. Apparently that's happening in Egypt right now, to work through and clarify the final details. I'm told that the first phase should be completed this week, and I'm asking everyone to move fast. I will continue to monitor this centuries-old conflict. Time is of the essence, or massive bloodshed will follow. That's something nobody wants to see. So when you see that, especially if you're on the Palestinian or Hamas side, and you see that time is of the essence or massive bloodshed will follow, I mean, honestly, you got to say, what have we seen for the last 2 years? More massive bloodshed? Is something beyond what we've seen so far? I mean, what is the implication there? Well, I can tell you somebody who definitely got the message and was very happy about it, and that's Benjamin Netanyahu.
Well, we accepted the deal, as did all the world. It was President Trump's plan. Hamas says that it accepted the deal. Now the onus is on Hamas. This plan consists of two parts. The first part is releasing all the hostages. Israel makes a tactical withdrawal, stays in Gaza. And then the second part is meant to demilitarize Gaza and disarm Hamas. That will be negotiated. But the first part is there. It's agreed upon. And that could be indeed the beginning of the end of the war. And as I said, since we accepted it, we have to see what Hamas will do. If Hamas will accept it, I think it's a very good sign. If Hamas doesn't accept it, and it's a possibility that we always take into mind, then Israel will receive, as President Trump says, the full support of the United States to forcefully act against it to bring about an end to the war.
See, you heard him there. You can read between the lines. It's not very hard. It's not even hardly between the lines. It's more like kind of on the lines. The United States will complete and fully support us in a military conquest. And you got to ask, I mean, has Netanyahu actually given up on a military conquest? You know he doesn't want to have a peace. You know he doesn't want to have a negotiated settlement that ends with the Palestinians remaining in the Strip and then saddling Israel with this requirement, whether to provide security or manage the rebuilding of the place, that will just infuriate many. There will be many, and I suspect not just in the government, but probably millions of people in Israel that will be angry at Netanyahu if this kind of a deal is done and the war comes to an end, and then Israel has to now keep its military bogged down inside the Gaza Strip, providing security. And you know that there's going to be low level of violence. In any case, it's going to go along with that. That's one of the reasons they withdrew the last time that they were in there, and then be responsible for rebuilding the place, which is the opposite of what they want, which is the expulsion of all the people. So has Israel really given up on that? I have my doubts. I think that Netanyahu reads that Trump Truth Social, and that was yesterday, and those comments, that interview was also yesterday. So I think it's pretty clear that Netanyahu is hoping that's exactly where it goes out, and that he probably hopes that the Hamas doesn't accept this. This is again why I say the one lever that Hamas has right now is to accept it all, because then that would put Netanyahu in the really troubling situation. If Hamas agrees to all the terms, says, yes, we'll demilitarize, we'll leave. In fact, we'll exit the place entirely, so we won't be in charge of anything, and the war will come to an end. Here's all the hostages, living and deceased. You've got it all, literally all the things that they said that they needed. If Hamas just gives them everything, and they should. Right now, if I was advising Hamas, I would say do 100%, not 90, not 95, 100. Do it all. That's the best play that you can make, because now then, if Netanyahu then gets everything that they're asking for in what he self-described as phase one, and they don't go to all of the other stuff that bring the peace, and instead continues on with the violence in the war, then the pressure could really mount from the outside world finally to where they could actually take action, political action, economic action against Israel. Because then it'll be clear that it's actually not Hamas who's the roadblock, but it's actually the Netanyahu government who doesn't want to have a peace, but only an expulsion. And God help us if that actually passes. But that's what I suspect is probably the intent and the hope of Benjamin Netanyahu. And we'll see if Hamas falls, victim to that too, because again, it bears repeating. And to be honest about this, what they did on 10/7, no matter what happened before that, it has been catastrophically bad for the people of Palestine, much, much worse than what existed before that. So they have been their own worst enemy, which is a big competition because their otherwise worst enemy is the Israeli Defense Forces and this government of Benjamin Netanyahu. And so, unfortunately, the people of Palestine are the ones who are paying for all of the sins of all of these warmongers. And so one hopes that the Arab regimes, if nothing else, can really finally knuckle down and put the pressure on Hamas to submit to all of these and at least end the killing for the Palestinian people. Then we can get to the second part there. But Netanyahu's not finished. I mentioned that there were, if the Hamas side does what I suggested here and plays their only card that they really have, then that would enable the pressure to be from the outside. Well, Netanyahu seems to be aware that that's a risk. So he took an opportunity in that same interview to completely trash all of Europe.
Europe has been absent because Europe has basically caved in to Palestinian terrorism, to radical Islamist minorities in their midst. And they basically said, just give them a Palestinian state, which would be the ultimate reward for Hamas after doing the greatest massacre against the Jews since the Holocaust. Now we'll give you a state in which you can continue the war against Israel. That's why Europe has essentially become irrelevant.
Now, he's right in one sense. Europe has become irrelevant, and it's irrelevant because of what Netanyahu mentioned before, is that right now, in that previous clip, the U.S. has their back, diplomatically, economically, and certainly militarily, because without our military support, Israel could not continue to do this. They couldn't have done what they've done the last 2 years, and they can't do anything militarily going forward. In either case, they have to have the backing of the United States diplomatically to give them protection from all the pressure that's been coming down. And 156 countries have now recognized a Palestinian state. And that includes many in the West of the otherwise people who are big supporters of the United States and allies and all that. And so he's mocking them and saying that's dumb. And of course, he's completely twisting around and perverting what they're actually arguing about. No one in the West is saying, yeah, just give Palestinian state for no reason, just because, just hand it to them. And that way they can use it as a staging ground for more terrorist attacks against Israel, which Netanyahu said there. That's absurd. It's insulting for him to say that because it's obviously not true. Unfortunately, Netanyahu does that, and he uses that rhetorical tools because he knows that some will listen to him and will not look at the fundamentals of the facts. They won't watch shows like what you're watching right now, where we have the actual physical evidence and the truth about what is actually going on. Because what he doesn't say anything about is, yes, 10/7. It was a horrible thing. But then he literally obliterates any kind of knowledge of everything that actually drove Europe and all these other countries to acknowledge a Palestinian state, even though it goes against a lot of history and even against the wishes of the United States. It's pretty strong so far because of the barbaric and the murderous actions of Netanyahu against the hapless Palestinian people. That's what they're pushing against. Nobody wants terrorism. Not one of those countries wants terrorism. They want the war to come to an end, and they want the Palestinian people to finally have a possibility of having a homeland and a chance to have a state of their own where they can just live like normal people and have a life, not just to exist like is the current situation. That's the best they can hope for the foreseeable future, but they want to have a life like everybody in Israel wants to have a life, free of terrorism, free of the threat of rockets coming in on their country. That's valid. I would want that too. I would not want to live that way. But there's how do you do that effectively? And then how do you sabotage your own opportunity here? How do you harm your own possibility for peace? And that's what Israel is doing right now. They are harming their own chance to have that peace. There is a path to do that. though it would be incredibly difficult. It would have been a lot easier, or a lot less, I won't even use that term easier. It would have been a lot less hard prior to 10/7 if some of the things that had not happened, even in the months prior to 10/7 to 2023, if they had done a different path there and sought any kind of peaceful coexistence where there was a future and a hope for the Palestinian side, they could have avoided all of this. And they would have had a better shot at having that secure situation that the Israelis want. But they haven't. And now then it's as hard as it would have been prior to, let's say, the summer of 2023. It is now infinitely harder now. But better to go down a hard path that has a shot at eventual success later on. And now it's going to be much later on because of the incredible amounts of damage that have been done. But at least there's a shot that way. But you go down this path, you keep going down a path that says, no, we're going to get a military conquest, then you are setting up the Israeli people for even more insecurity and more threats in the foreseeable future. This won't bring peace to Israel. You need to understand that. That's the bottom line here. And there's very, very practical reasons to explain why that is. Now, I mentioned to you why Netanyahu is so emphatic about having the help and support of President Trump right now and what Netanyahu wants. But as Marwan Bisharis pointed out, this predates both Trump and Netanyahu.
It is about the United States and Israel. They've been allies together, complicit in the occupation of Palestine for the past 50 years. They've been complicit together throughout the peace process, so-called peace process, the past 35 years. And the Saudis joined, just as they are now, they joined back in 1991. They actually went to Madrid. They were present in Madrid, International Peace Conference. But what did it lead to? We had 75,000 illegal settlers in 1991. Today, we have 750,000 settlers. Israel controls, occupies, commits genocide more than ever before in history throughout those 30 years of so-called peace process. And the problem is the same today as it was then. Vague agreements that are controlled by Israel, dictated by the United States, where Israel is able to turn everything into stages and phases and control the implementation, while the Palestinians are ever more marginalized and Palestine is ever more occupied.
And I mean, it's hard to argue with that 50-year lesson or 30-year lesson, as he said in the second half. I mean, it's laid out right there. You can see how the stuff has worked out. And if you only look at it from the Israeli side, you'll say, yes, there's been terrorist attacks and all this during this time. They don't deserve a land. If that's the only way you view it, you can come to that conclusion, and many do. Most in the United States do. Many do anyway. But you can't view it that way. And if you only view it from the Palestinian side, you're also going to have a problem, because you can say Israel has been occupying us since the 1967 war, and all the things that have happened in between there, and what the Palestinians define as terrorist attacks against their people, and extrajudicial killings, imprisonment without even being charged anything for extensive amounts of time, all this stuff. If you only view it like that, then you'll say that there can never be peace either. The only chance that anyone has is if the two sides finally come together and recognize the others actually have a right to exist. And that means Palestinian recognition of Israel's right to exist, and Israel recognizing Palestinians' rights to have a life. Until you get both of those things to happen, there's not even the possibility that this will bring peace. Don't be fooled into thinking if only Netanyahu gets his way here and has a military success, then finally peace will come to Israel. It won't. It won't. There is no way on God's earth that you're going to be able to literally kill everybody in the Palestinian Strip, or one day just bulldoze them out of the area and shove them into other states and somehow think that that's going to bring peace. It won't. All you'll be doing is transferring all of that venom that you have helped create and spread it elsewhere outside of the Gaza Strip. And I promise you, outside, there will be work where they will then plan future attacks just from the outside. You will not bring peace to yourself, even by a forced expulsion. The only chance you have to bring even stability, even a modicum of a peace, is to finally acknowledge from both sides that there is that the other side has legitimate security interests, and that we'll try to find some way, and both sides will have to consider ways that they're not going to get everything that they want and make concessions so that both sides have a chance to live in peace and stability. It will take a generation to get there, but you can't even start that clock of hope unless, first of all, you have leaders who stand up and say, this is what the right path is. We will lead it, and we will start this really hard process. That's what it's going to take. And right now, that's not even on the horizon. So I'm just telling you right now, don't be lulled into the seductive thought that because the Western side / the United States and Israel have the power dynamic in their favor, that they can compel and force the other side and bring peace to their side. It's an illusion, and it's only going to bring more instability, folks. That's what you need to understand. We'll see how this is going to play out, and I'll continue to track all this stuff for you as we do all the time. We have another show coming up this afternoon tomorrow. I've got the true story of violence against the Palestinians prior to 10/7. Don't miss this. Please don't miss this. If you want to have any idea of one of the reasons why the Palestinians have been, have used violence the way they have, if you want to understand what happened and why 10/7 specifically exploded when it did, watch the show tomorrow, because all of that informs where we're at now and why I'm so adamant of saying that there's only one path to peace here. Be sure and tune into that. 10 o'clock in the morning, we'll be showing that. We'll also have a special guest with Matthew Ho as a part of that. Later this afternoon at 2 p.m., we have Andrei Martyanov back on the show again, and we're going to look at a specific aspect of the Russia-Ukraine war, that the energy infrastructure, that both sides are really trying to knock the other sides out away from the front line. The front line continues to go on, but we're going to talk about how what's happening away from the front lines represents a new strategy, especially on the Russian side with their drone warfare, and what impact that may have on the front lines and on the resolution of that war. I'm Martyanov today at 2 p.m. We'll see you then, folks, on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.